The stars over Erebus 9 shimmered peacefully, a deceptive calm before the storm. It was a human colony, home to over 3 million people, scientists, engineers, soldiers, and their families. It wasn't a military stronghold, just a simple frontier world where humanity had pushed the boundaries of its expansion. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. Without warning, the sky burned red. Enormous alien warships descended from orbit, blocking out the sun. The Zorvax Empire had arrived, and they came not for negotiations, but for conquest. Their warfleet, sleek and dark as obsidian, carried weapons far beyond human understanding. Planetary siege cannons, plasma lances, and gravity bombers capable of leveling entire cities in seconds. The colony's defense systems barely had time to activate before the first wave of destruction rained down. The planet's orbital stations were obliterated within minutes, their debris falling like meteors onto the surface below. The communication hubs were the first targets, cutting off Erebus 9 from the rest of humanity. No distress signal, no cry for help, just silence. The human defense forces scrambled, pilots rushing to their fighters, ground troops setting up makeshift barricades in the streets. They were outgunned, outnumbered, but they fought with everything they had. Explosions tore through the colony as human anti-aircraft turrets fired desperately into the sky. Small squadrons of human fighters launched counterattacks, zigzagging between massive enemy dreadnoughts, scoring some kills. But it wasn't enough. Within an hour, the colony was surrounded. Erebus 9 was lost. The surviving human forces had no choice. They surrendered. Commander Elias Rourke, the highest-ranking officer left standing, ordered his troops to lay down their arms. His face was grim, his voice steady, but his fists were clenched. They all knew what the Zorvax were capable of. Still, war had rules. There were treaties in place, agreements signed by dozens of species. Prisoners of war were to be treated humanely. The Zorvax, however, had no intention of following those rules. The surviving 10,000 human soldiers were rounded up in the colony's central square, a massive open area surrounded by towering steel buildings, now scorched and crumbling from battle. The civilians, those who had survived the initial assault, were forced to watch, their faces streaked with dirt, fear, and silent rage. A Zorvax commander, tall and draped in ceremonial armor, stood atop a hovering platform, his voice cold and mechanical as it was amplified across the square. His alien eyes, pitch black and soulless, scanned the crowd before settling on Commander Rourke. "Humans are weak," he declared. "You are unfit to exist in this galaxy. Your species is an infestation, a disease that spreads where it does not belong. And today, we exterminate you." Rourke stepped forward, fists still bound behind his back. His voice was calm, but there was fire in his eyes. "There are laws. You know that." The Zorvax commander smirked, tilting his head as if amused. "There were laws. You think the galaxy will stop us? No one will come for you." He turned to his soldiers. "Execute them. All of them." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The civilians screamed, pleading, begging. The captured human soldiers remained silent, their jaws clenched, their eyes burning with defiance. Then the first shot was fired. The energy blast hit Rourke square in the chest, knocking him to the ground. His body twitched once. Then he was still. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, all hell broke loose. The Zorvax soldiers opened fire, cutting through human prisoners like they were nothing. Energy bolts tore through flesh, turning proud warriors into lifeless husks in seconds. Some humans tried to fight back, lunging at their captors even with their hands bound, only to be cut down mercilessly. The screams of the dying echoed through the square. Civilians watched in horror. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers held their families close, unable to look away. Some tried to cover their children's eyes, but the horror was too vast, too brutal to ignore. One by one, the entire captured battalion was executed, their bodies piling in the center of the square, a grotesque display of power. But the massacre wasn't over. The Zorvax commander turned his gaze to the civilians. He tilted his head, considering. "Burn it all," he finally said. "Let this colony be erased. Let the galaxy see what happens to those who defy us." A moment later, the sky ignited. Orbital bombardment began, reducing entire districts to ashes. The remaining civilians scattered, running for their lives, but there was nowhere to go. The Zorvax hunted them down with precision. No survivors, no mercy. Above the planet, the Zorvax commander watched from his warship, his arms folded as he observed the destruction. The planet that had once been a thriving human colony was now nothing but ruins, smoke, and lifeless bodies. Satisfied, he turned to his communication officer. "Broadcast this to the entire galaxy. Let them see what happens when humans stand against us." The footage of the massacre spread like wildfire, transmitted across thousands of systems. Some alien species watched in shock. Others laughed, mocking humanity's weakness. But deep in the void of space, a small fleet of human warships watched in silence. Their insignia bore no nation, no government, just a single symbol, a ghostly skull, surrounded by a wreath of fire. A transmission was sent. A voice, low and filled with something far darker than rage, whispered across encrypted channels. They just made the worst mistake of their existence. The stars remained unchanged, cold and distant, indifferent to the horrors that had unfolded on Erebus 9. The galaxy had seen the massacre. The video of 10,000 human soldiers executed, their bodies discarded like trash, and an entire colony wiped from existence had spread far and wide. Some alien races had watched in silent horror, others in amusement. The Zorvax had expected fear, submission. They had expected humanity to break. They had miscalculated. Deep in the uncharted void, far beyond the reach of any known empire, a fleet watched in silence. They did not wear the emblems of any human nation. They did not exist in any official records. They were ghosts, a force that had been waiting in the shadows, preparing for the day humanity would need them. The Ghost Fleet had been formed in secrecy, built from the ashes of old wars, designed for one purpose: retribution. These were not diplomats or politicians. They were not bound by treaties or negotiations. They were the last resort, the thing humanity would unleash when words and warnings failed. And now they had been called. A single transmission was sent to every captain, every soldier aboard the hidden fleet. The message was short, clear, and absolute. Erebus 9 has fallen. The Zorvax believe we are weak. Show them our answer. Silence followed. Then the war engines roared to life. The Ghost Fleet moved through the void like shadows, their ships coated in experimental cloaking technology that left them invisible to enemy scanners. No radio signals, no transmissions, just an eerie, unnatural quiet. Even their own people barely spoke, their minds focused on one thing: vengeance. The first strike came with no warning. A massive Zorvax supply convoy, carrying weapons, fuel, and reinforcements to the outer colonies, vanished in deep space. Not a distress signal, not a single escape pod. When Zorvax warships arrived at the last known coordinates, they found only the shattered remains of their fleet, floating in the abyss. The second strike came 2 days later. A communications hub on the Zorvax-controlled world of Vortilis 5 was infiltrated. The guards, some of the best warriors in the Empire, were found dead in their posts, their bodies untouched but their throats slit with surgical precision. The security footage was nothing but static. The entire data network collapsed within seconds, severing Zorvax fleets from their chain of command. Panic spread. The Zorvax had fought wars before, conquered entire civilizations, but never had they faced an enemy they couldn't see. The attacks were calculated, precise, each one cutting off another piece of their empire. Fuel depots exploded mysteriously. Entire battalions went missing. The Zorvax generals scrambled for answers. And then the first message arrived. A single transmission broadcasted across every Zorvax military frequency. A deep, cold voice, human, but something in it felt inhuman, something filled with quiet rage, something beyond mere anger. You took 10,000 of ours. We will take 100,000 of yours. You burned our world. We will erase your name from the stars. You wanted a war. Now you have it. The Zorvax High Command met in secret, their expressions grim. They had ruled through strength, through intimidation. Their power had never been challenged like this. This was not a rebellion, not a desperate resistance force clinging to survival. This was something else. The High Chancellor, the supreme leader of the Zorvax, stared at the reports with an emotion he had never known before. Fear. He looked at his generals, his advisors, and for the first time in his rule, he whispered the unthinkable. We have awakened something we do not understand. By the time the words left his lips, another attack had already begun. A Zorvax war factory on the planet Corval 7, responsible for manufacturing their advanced plasma weaponry, exploded in the middle of the night. No alarms had been triggered. The guards had been slaughtered before they could even draw their weapons. The factory was reduced to molten rubble. Survivors spoke in terrified whispers. They said they saw figures in the darkness, moving like ghosts, their armor black as the void, their weapons cutting through Zorvax warriors before they even knew they were under attack. The next day, the Zorvax fleet stationed over the colony world of Dresna 4 was wiped out. A single human battleship appeared, broadcasting an open message. You do not deserve mercy. Then, without a single shot fired, every Zorvax warship lost power. Their shields failed. Their weapons shut down. The crew screamed as their own ships turned against them. Targeting systems hijacked, engines overloading. In minutes, the entire fleet was gone. By now, the galaxy had begun to notice. Other empires, once mocking humanity's defeat, now watched in horror. This was not revenge. This was annihilation. The Zorvax Chancellor ordered a full retreat. He commanded his forces to fall back to their homeworld, to regroup, to defend what little they had left. The mighty empire, once feared across the stars, was now on the run. But the Ghost Fleet did not stop. Another message came, whispered through encrypted channels, spreading like a curse. There is nowhere you can hide. We are coming. For the first time in history, the Zorvax begged for mercy. They sent diplomats, offering peace, offering to return any surviving prisoners, offering worlds, resources, anything to stop the attacks. No answer came. The Silent Reapers did not negotiate. They did not forget. They did not forgive. And the war was just beginning. The void of space was silent, as it always was. No explosions, no gunfire, no screams, just the empty blackness stretching infinitely in every direction. But in that silence, something moved. Unseen, unstoppable, and filled with vengeance. The Ghost Fleet had arrived. The Zorvax Empire, once mighty and unchallenged, had ruled through terror. Their war fleets had shattered civilizations, burned planets, and wiped entire species from history. They had believed themselves untouchable, invincible. And then they had made the mistake of massacring 10,000 human prisoners of war. Now, humanity's answer had come, not as diplomats, not as soldiers fighting a conventional war, but as something far worse. The Ghost Fleet was not here to conquer. They were here to destroy. A massive Zorvax battle station, orbiting the industrial world of Typhos 3, was the first to feel their wrath. It was a fortress, heavily armed, shielded by a fleet of warships, with thousands of Zorvax troops stationed inside. They believed they were safe. They were wrong. Without warning, every system aboard the station failed. The lights flickered once, then died. The alarms did not sound. The automated defenses did not activate. The Zorvax officers barely had time to register what was happening before the oxygen levels plummeted. Panic spread. The security teams ran to their posts, but their weapons refused to fire. Their ships, stationed around the station, remained motionless, trapped, locked down by an invisible force. The command center was in chaos, their screens filled with nothing but static. And then the slaughter began. The first deaths were silent. Zorvax soldiers patrolling the darkened halls suddenly found their throats slit from the shadows. Others were pulled into the darkness, vanishing without a sound. Their bodies were later found, eyes wide open, frozen in terror. In the hangar bay, a squad of elite Zorvax warriors had gathered, waiting for orders, their claws gripping their plasma rifles tightly. They had fought countless battles, conquered entire species. They were not afraid of war. But then the airlocks opened. The pressure shifted. Something had entered the station. And then they saw them. Figures, black as the void, moved through the smoke. No sound, no battle cries, no hesitation. The Zorvax opened fire, but their weapons malfunctioned, short-circuiting in their hands. And before they could react, the shadows struck. Humans, but not like any humans the Zorvax had faced before. Their armor absorbed the light, making them look like living ghosts. Their weapons cut through Zorvax flesh effortlessly, leaving no chance for survival. The Zorvax screamed. They fought back, but it was like fighting the darkness itself. The Ghost Fleet swept through the station, taking control within minutes. The command center was overrun. The governor of Typhos III, a high-ranking Zorvax noble, tried to send a distress signal. His hand trembled as he activated the communicator, his voice desperate. "We are under attack. Unknown forces, no warning, no mercy. We need reinforcements now." Static. And then a voice. Deep, human, cold. "No reinforcements are coming." A second later, the transmission cut. The station's reactor core was set to overload. The Ghost Fleet had no interest in capturing it. The humans left as silently as they had arrived, fading into the void. Minutes later, the entire battle station erupted into a fireball, taking every Zorvax aboard with it. The Empire had lost a key stronghold in mere minutes, and the attacks did not stop. On Norvik Prime, a planet known for its shipyards and war factories, a fleet of Zorvax destroyers was preparing to launch. The Empire was beginning to mobilize, believing they could crush this phantom threat. But the Ghost Fleet was already there. The attack was surgical. An EMP blast shut down the entire shipyard in a fraction of a second. The warships, still in dock, became nothing but lifeless hunks of metal, their reactors disabled, their crews trapped inside. Then, the humans struck from within. The Zorvax engineers and workers tried to flee, but the Ghost Fleet had infiltrated the facility before the attack even began. One by one, the shipyards were turned against their masters, detonating in a chain reaction that engulfed the entire sector. By the time the Zorvax fleet from another system arrived, there was nothing left but burning wreckage. The Empire had lost an entire fleet before it could even launch. Whispers spread. The Zorvax war machine, once feared, was falling apart. But the humans did not stop. They hunted down every Zorvax supply route, disrupted their communications, and ambushed entire battalions before they even knew they were under attack. The Chancellor of the Zorvax Empire sat in the darkened war chamber, watching reports flood in, one disaster after another. Every attempt to track, predict, or counter the human attacks failed. Their enemy had no central base, no homeworld to target, no weaknesses to exploit. A general stood, his voice shaking. "We must negotiate with them. Offer peace." The room fell silent. The Zorvax Chancellor gritted his teeth, his claws digging into the stone table before him. Never, in the history of their empire, had they considered surrendering to any species. But this was not a war. This was extermination. And the worst part, they never saw it coming. The Zorvax homeworld had never known fear. For centuries, it had been the beating heart of an empire that spanned hundreds of star systems. Its cities stretched towards the sky, its war fleets patrolled the void with unmatched power, and its rulers sat on thrones of steel, unchallenged and unbreakable. But now, the silence of fear gripped the planet. The great Zorvax fleets were gone, reduced to burning wreckage across the stars. The shipyards were silent, their forges cold. Entire colonies had gone dark. Their supply lines had vanished. Their armies had been slaughtered in the shadows, unable to fight back against an enemy they could not see. And now, the Ghost Fleet had arrived. The attack began without warning, as it always did. No alarms sounded. No warships moved to intercept. The orbital defenses, once considered impenetrable, sat lifeless, their systems hijacked by an unseen force. The Zorvax command center, buried deep within the planet, was in chaos. Generals shouted over one another, scrambling to issue orders, to make sense of the madness unfolding above them. The first explosion tore through Sector 4, a military district housing thousands of elite Zorvax soldiers. Fire and smoke rose into the air as detonations rippled through the city, obliterating command posts, barracks, and supply depots. The second wave of attacks targeted the power grid. Entire regions of the capital were plunged into darkness. The mighty towers of the Zorvax elite, once symbols of power, now stood in eerie silence, their neon lights flickering and dying. Then the Ghost Fleet descended. Jet-black dropships, invisible to radar, moved through the sky like shadows given form. They carried no flags, no insignias, only warriors clad in armor as dark as the void, their weapons humming with lethal energy. The first screams came from the royal palace guards. They were the best warriors the Empire had to offer, trained from birth to protect their rulers. They did not last 5 minutes. The humans moved like wraiths, appearing and disappearing between the towering structures, cutting down every Zorvax in their path. The Chancellor of the Zorvax Empire watched it all unfold from his palace balcony. He had been untouchable for decades, ruling with absolute power. Now he stood frozen, his blood running cold. A desperate signal was sent out, a plea for help to any remaining Zorvax warlords, mercenaries, anyone willing to fight. No one answered. For the first time in history, the Zorvax were alone. The Chancellor's advisors urged him to flee, to escape through the underground tunnels, to find refuge on a distant world. But there was nowhere left to run. The humans had made that clear. A single transmission hijacked every screen, every device on the planet. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a speech. It was a single sentence, spoken in a voice cold as death. Your time is over. Then the executions began. The Zorvax ruling elite, the warlords who had ordered the massacre of 10,000 human prisoners, were dragged from their palaces, from their fortified mansions. There were no trials, no negotiations, only justice. One by one, they were brought before the ruined capital, before the burning remains of their empire. And there, in front of the remaining Zorvax citizens, they were silenced. The Zorvax people, once proud and arrogant, fell to their knees. They had mocked humanity. They had slaughtered humans like animals. And now, they begged for mercy. Some whispered promises of surrender, others sobbed in terror, but the Ghost Fleet did not respond. Because humanity had not come for peace. They had come for reckoning. The Zorvax homeworld lay in ruins. Once it had been the crown jewel of their empire, a world of towering spires, endless military fortresses, and industrial zones that churned out war machines without rest. Now it was a graveyard. The mighty warships that once patrolled its orbit were nothing more than lifeless wreckage, drifting in silence. The streets of the capital, once filled with the march of soldiers, were deserted, soaked in blood and fire. But it was not over. The Ghost Fleet had not come to occupy. They had come to end this. Deep beneath the surface, in a hidden war chamber, the last remnants of Zorvax leadership huddled together. Generals, nobles, and high-ranking officials, all that was left of the once mighty empire. Their eyes darted from screen to screen, their claws trembling. Every stronghold had fallen. Every fleet had been wiped out. There was no one left to save them. The Chancellor sat at the head of the table, his massive frame slumped in defeat. His golden war armor, once a symbol of absolute power, now felt like a coffin wrapped around his body. He had ruled through fear, through strength, believing that no force in the galaxy could ever challenge the Zorvax. And yet here he was, waiting for the end. A transmission cut through the silence. The humans had hacked their secure channel. The screen flickered to life. No face appeared, only a voice, cold and emotionless. You wanted war. You wanted blood. You thought humans were weak. Silence. The Zorvax leaders shrank in their seats. They had mocked humanity once, believing them to be inferior, fragile creatures. Now, they were learning the truth. You will not rebuild. You will not rise again. This is your legacy, death and silence. And then the countdown began. The Ghost Fleet had activated the planet's self-destruct failsafes. The Zorvax had built their empire on war, on weapons of mass destruction. And now, those very weapons would be their doom. Panic erupted. Some Zorvax fell to their knees, praying to gods that would not answer. Others tried to escape, fleeing into underground tunnels, boarding ships that would never launch. The Chancellor stood, trembling, looking up at the screen. "Please," he whispered, his voice hollow. "Mercy." The human voice responded, calm, unwavering. "Like the mercy you showed our people." The Chancellor's claws clenched. His empire had ruled for hundreds of years, built on the corpses of the weak. They had never once spared a species they conquered. And now, in his final moments, he realized what true fear felt like. The countdown reached 0. A deep, low rumble shook the planet to its core. Explosions erupted from every military complex, every fortress, every war facility. The sky turned red, firestorms engulfing entire cities. The ground cracked and split apart, swallowing palaces whole. The once mighty Zorvax homeworld burned. From orbit, the Ghost Fleet watched in silence. They did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They simply observed the inevitable. Justice had been delivered. The empire that had once butchered human prisoners like cattle was now nothing but ash. And with that, the Ghost Fleet turned, vanishing into the void. Their mission was complete. The Zorvax homeworld was gone. Where once stood mighty cities and towering war fortresses, there was now only silence and drifting debris. The flames of destruction had long since died out, leaving behind a husk of what was once the most feared empire in the galaxy. But the galaxy had changed. News of the Zorvax's fall spread like wildfire. It reached every corner of the known universe, from the lawless outer colonies to the grand halls of other alien empires. A civilization that had once seemed invincible had been erased in a matter of weeks. And the ones who had done it, the humans. They had not come with grand fleets or overwhelming numbers. They had not waged war in the way the Zorvax had expected. Instead, they had struck from the shadows, torn apart the enemy piece by piece, and unleashed vengeance with a precision that sent shivers down the spine of every species. The Ghost Fleet had disappeared after the final blow, vanishing into the void as if they had never existed. No one knew where they had gone. No one knew who commanded them. But everyone knew their name. Whispers filled the stars. Some spoke of them as demons in the dark, an unstoppable force that punished those who dared to harm humanity. Others called them avengers, soldiers who had sacrificed everything to bring justice to those who had wronged their kind. And then there were those who feared what it meant. The fall of the Zorvax was not just an act of war, it was a message. Humanity was not to be underestimated. In the great halls of the Galactic Union, alien diplomats spoke in hushed tones, their faces pale with uncertainty. If humans could do this to the Zorvax, what could they do to others? Were they a force of justice, or something far more dangerous? The Union's ruling council convened in secret, debating what should be done. Some argued for alliances, believing that it was better to stand with the humans than against them. Others urged caution, warning that humanity had revealed a darkness they did not fully understand. But in the end, no decision was made. Because humanity had not asked for alliances, they had not made demands. They had simply disappeared, leaving only the legend of their vengeance. On distant worlds, in the quiet corners of space, there were those who had once mocked humanity. Warlords, slavers, conquerors. They had seen the humans as weak, fragile, unworthy of fear. Now, they slept with one eye open. Because in the darkness of space, there was always the question, always the fear. What if the ghost fleet comes for us next?